Welcome to Document Design 101. In this video, we will discuss several important elements of document design, including text, layout, color, graphic elements, including photos, tables, clip art, and why document design matters. Are you bored yet? This is an example of bad document design and delivery. Everything from the lack of color, the lack of differentiation in the text, and especially the fact that why document design matters comes last, when I think we need to consider that first. So let's start over. We are going to discuss how you can use document design to improve the rhetorical impact of your work, regardless of what kind of text you're creating. So while there's always going to be different expectations and affordances depending on your genre, audience, things like that, most documents are going to deal with text, layout, color, and graphics. And you can learn more about a lot of these things in Chapter 11 of Situating Research, where we talk about visual design and especially the effective creation of tables, how to caption things, stuff like that. So let's talk about why design matters. Here is a terrible slide. It actually caused me pain to create a slide this bad. The things happening here are a problematic contrast, too many elements on the page with no consideration for arrangement. Look at this text in the middle, and remember that people are often going to be reading on things like their tablets or a phone while they're on the train. You need to make things accessible, easy to read, and pretty, and we don't see much of that. So we're going to talk about how to use better text, color, these images, and arrangement that are a nightmare. So we're going to discuss how we fix some of those things. Okay, type style is something a lot of people take for granted, but in design it's important. You want to make sure that you're selecting fonts and making things the right size so that they'll be easy to read. You can make things more accessible in your choices so that people who use screen readers or other accessibility devices are going to have an easier time translating your work. And also fonts sort of carry their own tone or personality. And I'll be sharing a link to this font conference video, which is pretty cheesy, but it does show you some of the ways that we can think about these sort of personifications of font and what messages that carries. Okay, the other thing to consider is, readability as far as serif versus sans serif fonts. Traditionally, people have thought that sans serif fonts, that's things like Arial, Helvetica, this one here, you can see the differences with how clean those are, and so they're often easier to read on screens, while the serif fonts like Times New Roman, Cambria, Garamond, things like that are traditionally associated with longer text documents or print. Thanks to how much higher the resolution is on screens these days, that is not as much of a consideration as it used to be. Same thing with the accessibility of different fonts, and people have a lot more choices of those and a lot more screens. A lot of different software is going to work better with multiple fonts than it did, say, 10 years ago even. Remember, you can do things like bold or color for emphasis. Don't use underlining. We always expect that to be a hyperlink now. So that was disappointing and makes it just seem like you have a broken link if it doesn't go anywhere. You want to limit your variation. You're not going to be changing fonts every other paragraph. 2 will usually do it. You can use text in creative ways as far as having some call-out boxes or making a certain quotation bigger or coloring that as a way to emphasize that material, to allow your readers to do sort of some scanning or pre-reading. And it also just sort of draws the eye down a page. So consider how you can use type style effectively. The next thing to consider is space and layout. You would have noticed on those earlier slides that there wasn't much consideration of things like margins, of things like white space, that we really need, especially in screen reading. So think about how you can make things both aesthetically pleasing, but also legible. Add plenty of white space around your margins. Most online writing is going to use single space text. We only see double space text often in academic writing, and it started coming that way so that professors and teachers could add comments and corrections above or below text. For the rest of the world, white space functions differently. And to learn a lot more about that, you should check out this article by Mark Bolton that gives some great examples and talks through the importance of white space. All right, one way that we can add some white space and also make things faster for people to read is to take like blocks of text or paragraphs and turn that into lists. We can make numbered lists whenever you're actually giving steps to follow. If the order isn't important, though, definitely use bullets instead. And right-click on the bullet, and you can define your own. You can change the color. You can change the size. Make something look like a checklist if it is, for example. Don't just use hyphens as your bullets. No. All right. Color works the same way that a lot of these other design elements do, in the sense that you want it to be limited. You want things to have a consistency. You want things to have high contrast, not like light yellow on pink or green on blue or things like that. And just like fonts, colors can convey ideas or moods. Some have cultural connotations, and those can shift. Even what color people wear to funerals, for example, is culturally dependent. So I have a link here to a website that discusses those elements of color a little bit more and tells you a bit about color theory. Okay, in terms of other graphic elements, it's really becoming more and more expected that people will add photos or some other style. We often have used graphs, tables, things like that in scientific writing. But now it's becoming where you have to have an image at the top of your blog. You have to have a thumbnail that's going to drive people to your article, things like that. Within your texts, make sure that those things are supporting the text, either by what tone they set or by giving additional information, so it's not just there to distract. And then don't just repeat the content. We include graphs because they make it easier to understand trends in the data. And so you just want to restate those trends or maybe point to one or two data points that are related in that chart or graph rather than listing it all off again. All right, and then finally, clip art is almost never a good idea. I mean, maybe for a nursery school newsletter or something like that, but you're not going to want to use that for professional documents. You have a lot better sources available to find good images like stock photos. I'm sure you're all familiar with Google image search. You might not know that you can do a reverse image search by right-clicking on photos within your browser. So sometimes you'll be able to track something down to its original photographer, or if something has been modified, you can find the original image and things like that. So that can be useful. There are sites like Unsplash, which I will link to for you, where you can search images by keyword, color, orientation, things like that, which can be super helpful in document design. As you're going through doing these searches, make sure that you're not using anything with watermarks, because that means it wasn't royalty free and you don't have permission. And then also make sure that things are good quality and aren't pixelated or too dark or things like that. Always add captions, and this can be just really small text right along the bottom or up the side of an image. Whenever you have the original artist name, that's preferable. You could also just use the website name or the URL where you found it. I find the easiest way to do these is to add your own text box and move it in sort of at the end. You can combine the two images so that they'll move together, but a lot of times the caption functions within word processors can be glitchy. All right, so those are the basics of document design. There's a lot more to say about graphic design, and I have some links here to basic graphic design principles. The shorter version is CRAP. You might be familiar with the CRAP test for evidence. You know, is it current, relevant, accurate, all of that stuff. But in this case, it stands for contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. And these are things that are going to be particularly useful if you're working on something like a flyer, brochure, advertising, things like that. They're not as important usually for your standard academic projects. And a lot of times there are professionals who will help you turn your content into something that is more effective in terms of graphic design. So later in your business communications, you might have some help on that front. But it's always useful to know a little bit about these things, both so you can see how things are designed to affect you as a consumer of text, and also to think about how you can develop your skills in this area. So if you have any other questions about document design or graphic design, if you'd like to learn more about the technology and just the logistics behind some of this kind of work, I'm happy to discuss any of that with you during conference or office hours. Good luck. Go make it work.